sorry. Facebook just changed over their system, and it's very confusing. So, used to be I just had to push one button. It was very quick, and now I'm realizing that I should really start the Facebook one first because it takes a really long time for the Facebook one to now get sorted, which is very annoying. Okay. All right. I think we are almost sorted. Maybe. Oh, we're still waiting on Facebook Live. All right. So today I thought we would do a book called Jackie's Gift. It's about the other holiday season, but since we're having holidays, it seemed a good book. It seemed the moment to be doing this. I also would like to say that, as you can see, I am wearing a mask, a homemade mask, and it goes up like this. But you can't really hear me if I use it. So I will make a one-time offer to anyone who is watching this that if you post on Facebook that you would like, I will make a mask for you if you are in need of a mask. They're quite nice. I will do it in the color of your preference to the best of my ability. These ones have little pockets. These little pockets. You're stuck with red ribbons because that's what I have, though you have to be very impressed. They're red with polka dots. So, very snazzy. Anyway, if you would like a mask, just post in the comments and I will make one and I will send it to you if you are far enough away that mailing is necessary. Otherwise, I will drop it by. But I am more than happy to do that for people who do not have the time or the will or the ability to procure a mask in another way. I am more than happy to facilitate. So let's get started. So this book, oops, has a bookmark. It's called Jackie's Gift. A true story of Christmas, Hanukkah, and Jackie Robinson. Oh, weird. For some reason, YouTube is now doing it in reverse. Okay. Steve stared up at the tall evergreen. It was Christmas Day, and he was helping his neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, decorate their tree. Mrs. Robinson hung blue, gold, green, and red ornaments, while little Jackie tossed tinsel over the lower branches. "Pass me that string of lights, Steve," Mr. Robinson called from behind the tree that dwarfed his nearly 6-foot frame. Steve hastily gathered up the lights. "What a swell-looking tree," he said. "We had to have the biggest one in the lot," Mr. Robinson replied, smiling. "This is our first Christmas in Brooklyn, after all." Steve couldn't believe his luck. He was standing here, decorating a tree with his new neighbor, the Brooklyn Dodgers' famous second baseman, Jackie Robinson. Steve Satlow lived for baseball. 9 months earlier, he had eagerly awaiting the start of the 1948 baseball season and the Brooklyn Dodgers returned to Ebbets Field. But on Tilden Avenue, where Steve lived, another bit of news had all the neighbors abuzz. A black family was moving into the 2-story brick house 2 doors down from the Satlows. Over dinner one night, Steve's dad told him that some of the neighbors had tried to stop the black family from moving in. A few families had sent around a petition, but they couldn't get enough signatures. We refused to sign it, of course. I can't believe that any other Jews would sign the petition either, Mrs. Satlow said. Why? Asked Steve. Well, Mr. Satlow explained, do you remember that your Bobby and Zadie, my parents, left Russia for America when they were in their 20s? Sure, Steve said. They still talk with accents. They had to flee from people who were threatening them badly, who were treating them badly because they were Jewish. They had heard that in America, people of different races and religions live together in peace. That's why they came here. If only America were colorblind, added Mrs. Satlow. All I know is that Jackie Robinson is the best player the Dodgers have ever had, black or white, Steve said. It's funny you should mention Jackie Robinson, said Steve's dad. Why's that? Mr. Satlow smiled. Because that's just who's going to be our new neighbor. You've got to be kidding, Steve shouted. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined living 2 doors down from Jackie Robinson. For days, Steve couldn't stop peeking out the front window waiting for the Robinsons' moving van. When the van finally arrived, he rode his bike up and down the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of the baseball player. He saw men carrying lots of boxes. He saw a lady and figured she must be Mrs. Robinson, holding a little boy's hand. But there was no sign of his hero. The next morning, Steve and his mother picked cherries from the tree in their yard and brought them to the house at 123 Tilden. As his mother and Mrs. Robinson chatted about the neighborhood, Steve peered around the doorway into the house, but he still didn't see Mr. Robinson. Steve perked up when Mrs. Robinson asked him, Are you a Dodgers fan? You bet, a Jackie Robinson fan, too. Mrs. Robinson laughed. Good, you'll have to go to a game with Jackie Jr. and me soon. Steve left the Robinsons' house beaming. He hoped Mrs. Robinson really meant what she said. On a warm, sunny afternoon, a few weeks later, Ebbets Field was packed. From their seats right behind home plate, Steve, Mrs. Robinson, and Jackie Jr. cheered loudly when number 2 came up to bat. Steve was sure Jackie could hear them. The bases were loaded. The Dodgers fans were on their feet screaming, Jackie, Jackie, Jackie. Jackie lifted his big bat high above his shoulder. Steve held his breath as the ball sailed over the plate. Ball, the umpire shouted. Jackie relaxed his stance and took a few practice swings. He bent low, lifted his bat, and waited. The pitcher reared back, stepped forward, and unleashed a thundering fastball. Jackie swung hard. Oops. Hello, Betsy. Do you want to help? Are you going to help read? I have to show the pictures. You're in the way. The ball and bat exploded with a crack. The ball flew over the center field wall. Mrs. Robinson and the boys jumped almost as high. Best of all, Steve got to walk home from the game with none other than Jackie Robinson himself. It was the most exciting day of Steve's life. Betsy has gone to chirp the birds. Now, months later, Mrs. Robinson swished on the Christmas tree lights. They sparkled, red, yellow, and green. Wow, Steve cried. Jackie Jr. clapped and laughed as his father lifted the angel to the very top of the tree. Have you decorated your tree yet? Jackie asked Steve as Mrs. Robinson handed them both mugs of hot chocolate. We don't have one, Steve said. We don't have one, Steve said with a heavy sigh. The Robinsons shared a puzzled look. Mrs. Robinson cleared her throat. Are you enjoying the school vacation, Steve? Steve grinned. You bet. The subject of the Christmas tree seemed to be forgotten. Soon, Steve thanked the Robinsons and left to join his friends who were sledding in the park. Later that afternoon, Jackie Robinson knocked on the Satlow's door with a Christmas tree under his arm. My goodness, Jackie Robinson, what a surprise, Mrs. Satlow cried as she opened the door. It's so nice to finally meet you. Steve talks about you nonstop. Come in, please. Steve was at our house earlier, Jackie said as he opened stepped into the living room. The tree was still under his arm. He was helping us decorate our tree, and well, he hesitated. He said you didn't have one, so I hope you don't mind. I bought him a tree. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide her shock. Oh my, she whispered. I don't know what to say. It's so kind of you to think of us. After Jackie left, Steve's mother walked around the room, not sure what to do. What's that tree doing here? Steve's father asked when he got home. Jackie Robinson bought it for Steve, she said. Can you believe it? Didn't you tell them we don't celebrate Christmas? Mr. Sattler asked. I didn't know what to say. I know his wife Rachel, but it was the first time I'd met Jack. Mrs. Sattler sank into the couch, shaking her head. Imagine what my mother will say. Oh, I know what she'll say, Sarah. She'll say, oy vey. Steve ran in breathless from sledding. His eyes widened when he spotted the tree. Did you tell Jackie Robinson that you wanted a Christmas tree? His father asked sternly. No, Steve exclaimed. I just told him we didn't have one. Did Jackie bring that tree for me? It's Mr. Robinson to you, his father corrected. Can we please keep it, Dad, please? It was a mistake, explained Mr. Sattler. Mr. Robinson didn't understand that we don't celebrate Christmas. It's just a tree, Steve protested. It's more than a tree. It's a religious symbol. It's just like our menorah is for Hanukkah, Mr. Sattler told him. But Dad, Steve said, the tree is a gift. You always say to accept a gift in the spirit that they are given, right? Before Mr. Sattler could reply, the doorbell rang. Steve's mother answered the door and greeted the Robinsons warmly. She waved them inside. Jack just told me he bought Steve a tree, so he brought some extra lights and ornaments, Mrs. Robinson began, and then stopped. What's wrong? She asked. Rachel, do you remember at Easter when you asked what church we belong to, and I told you we're Jewish? That means we don't celebrate Christmas. We celebrate Hanukkah, Steve's mother explained gently. Instead of having a tree, we light candles in a menorah, Mr. Sattler said. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home, Mrs. Sattler said. My mother would be shocked to see a Christmas tree in our house. Mrs. Robinson looked at her husband in horror. The room was silent. Steve tried not to laugh. The adults looked so seriously. When he caught his mother's eye, she started to giggle, and soon they joined in. What a mess I've made of things. Please forgive us, Jackie said, chuckling. We're so embarrassed, Mrs. Robinson said. Please don't be, Mrs. Sattler said. You are being generous to our son. There's no harm in that. So, Dad, said Steve, looking at his father hopefully, what do you think? Mr. Sattler smiled and looked down at his son. Okay, this Jewish family is going to have a Christmas tree and a menorah this year. Just like me. And they did. I'm going to just turn and read the author's note without bending my back. Author's note. Jackie's gift is based on a true story. My parents, Jack and Rachel Robinson, moved to 123 Tilden Avenue in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn in 1948. After a very, it's written by Sharon Robinson. After a very successful first season with the Brooklyn Dodgers, my father began his second season in a slump that lasted until mid-June when he hit a grand slam. The Sattlers lived just down the avenue from my parents. This was before my younger brother David and I were born, when my older brother Jackie Jr. was just a toddler. In real life, Archie and Sarah Sattler had 3 children, Steve and his sisters, Senna and Paula. Our families formed a bond many years ago that has lasted a lifetime. In the years since, Steve and I both lost our fathers, as well as Jackie Jr. and Paula. The Christmas tree story was always a big hit in our family. A few years ago, I met one of my favorite illustrators, E.B. Lewis, at a children's book festival. E.B. asked me if the fabled Christmas tree story about my father was really true. I told him it was, and that evening we agreed to work together to share it with children. Steve delighted in helping me retell a cherished piece of his childhood, as much as Sarah Sattler and my mother enjoyed sharing their memories with me. I hope our story will inspire families for generations to come to look beyond race and religion into people's hearts. It's dedicated to Rachel Robinson, my extraordinary mother and best friend, and her dearest friend, Sarah Satlow Simra. I will say, lots of Jewish families during this period did actually have Christmas trees, and they were seen as secular objects, as objects of being American, more than religious objects. While some Orthodox families or people who grew up in more Orthodox traditions would have disapproved the way that grandmother is alluded to. My father grew up with all Jewish grandparents, and he grew up with Christmas tree and doing Christmas, not Hanukkah. Hanukkah wasn't really a big thing until years later, sort of starting in the 50s and growing. And it was sort of this minor holiday that was elevated to become a bigger holiday to counterbalance that just thing like having Christmas trees and sort of go against that. The sort of secularization, the adoption of Christian symbols as secular. So I think it's important to remember that this is only one version of this immigrant generation's reaction. Lots of people during this time, lots of Jews during this time period certainly had Christmas trees. They just did them as because Christmas trees are lovely and they smell nice and you can put presents under them. And a lot of them wouldn't have known about Hanukkah anyway, because it was such a minor holiday that it wasn't something that people might have been aware of, but it wasn't as familiar a holiday as it is today. All right, so I am going to now read a couple chapters, at least one chapter of The Phantom Tollbooth. So what has happened? There's just been a fight in the marketplace between the humbug and the spelling bee, and now Milo is going to get blamed for it. Chapter 5, Short Shrift. "Look what you've done," angrily shouted one of the salesmen. "Look what you've done, what you've looked," angrily shouted one of the salesmen. He meant to say, "Look what you've done," but the words had gotten hopelessly mixed up, that no one could make sense at all. "Do going to we what are," complained another, as everyone set about straightening things as well as they could. For several minutes, no one spoke an understandable sentence, which greatly added to the confusion. As soon as possible, however, the stalls were righted and the words swept into one large pile for sorting. Spelling Bee, who was quite upset by the whole affair, had flown off in a huff, and just as Milo got to his feet, the entire police force of Dictionopolis appeared, loudly blowing his whistle. "Now we'll get to the bottom of this," he heard someone say. "Here comes Officer Shrift." Striding across the square was the shortest policeman Milo had ever seen. He was scarcely 2 feet tall and almost twice as wide, and he wore a blue uniform with a white belt and gloves and a peaked hat and a very fierce expression. He continued blowing the whistle until his face was beet red, stopping only long enough to shout, "You're guilty, you're guilty," at everyone he passed. "I've never seen anyone so guilty," he said as he reached Milo. Then, turning towards Talk, who was still ringing loudly, he said, "Turn off that dog. It's disrespectful to sound your alarm in the presence of a policeman." He made careful note of that in his black book and strode up and down, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the wreckage of the marketplace. Very pretty, he scowled. "Who's responsible for all this? Speak up or I'll arrest the lot of you." There was a long silence. Since hardly anybody had actually seen what happened, no one spoke. "You," said the policeman, pointing an accusing finger at the humbug, who was brushing himself off and straightening his hat. "You look suspicious to me." Then the startled humbug dropped his cane nervously and replied, "Let me assure you, sir, on my honor as a gentleman, that I was merely an innocent bystander minding my own business and enjoying the stimulating sights and sounds of the world of commerce when this young lad—" "Aha!" interrupted Officer Shrift, making another note in his little book. "Just as I thought. Boys are always the cause of everything." There's Officer Shrift and Milo. "Pardon me," insisted the humbug, "but I in no way meant to imply that—" "Silence!" thundered the policeman, pulling himself up to his full height and glaring menacingly at the terrified bug. "And now," we continue to speak to Milo, "what were you doing on the night of July 27th? What does that have to do with it? Asked Milo. That's my birthday. That's what, said the policeman as he entered, forgot my birthday in his little book. Boys always forget people's birthdays. You have committed the following crimes, he continued. Having a dog without an unauthorized alarm, sowing confusion, upsetting the apple cart, wreaking havoc, and mincing words. Now see here, growled Tock angrily. And illegal barking, he added, frowning at the watchdog. It's illegal. It's against the law to bark without using the barking meter. Are you ready to be sentenced? Only a judge can sentence you, said Milo, who remembered reading that in one of his school books. Good point, replied the policeman, taking off his cap and putting on a long black robe. I am also the judge. Now, would you like a long sentence or a short sentence? A short one, if you please, said Milo. Good. The judge rapped his gavel 3 times. I always have trouble remembering long ones. How about I am? That's the shortest sentence I know. Everyone agreed that it was a very fair sentence, and the judge continued. There will also be a small additional penalty of 6 million years in prison. Case closed, he pronounced, rapping his gaggle. Come with me, I'll take you to the dungeon. Only a jailer can put you in prison, offered Milo, quoting the same book. Good point, said the judge, removing his robe and taking out a large bunch of keys. I am also the jailer. And with that, he led them away. Keep your chin up, shouted the humbug. Maybe they'll take off 1 million years for good behavior. The heavy prison door swung back slowly, and Milo and Tock followed Officer Shrift down the long, dark corridor, lit only by an occasional flickering candle. Watch the steps, advised the policeman as they started down a steep circular staircase. The air was dank and musty, like the smell of wet blankets, and the massive stone walls were slimy to the touch. Down, down they went, until they arrived at another door, even heavier and stronger looking than the first. A cobweb brushed across Milo's face, and he shuddered. You'll find it quite pleasant in here, chuckled the policeman as he slid the bolt back and pushed the door open with a screech and a squeak. Not much company, but you can always chat with the witch. The witch? Trembled Milo. Yes, she's been in here for a long time, he said, starting along another corridor. In a few more minutes, they had gone through 3 doors, across a narrow footbridge, down 2 more corridors and another stairwell, and finally in front of a small cell door. This is it, said the policeman. All the comforts of home. The door opened and then shut, and Milo and Tock found themselves in a high-vaulted cell with 2 tiny windows halfway up the wall. See you in 6 million years, said Officer Shrift, and the sound of his footsteps grew fainter and fainter until it wasn't heard at all. Looks serious, doesn't it, Tock? Said Milo very sadly. Certainly does, the dog replied, sniffing around to see what their new quarters were like. I don't know what I'm going to do for all that time. I don't even have a checker set or a box of crayons. Don't worry, growled Tock, raising one paw assuredly. Something will turn up. Here, wind me, will you? I'm beginning to run down. You know something, Tock, he said as he wound up the dog. You can get in a lot of trouble mixing up words or just not knowing how to spell them. If we ever get out of here, I'm going to make sure to learn all about them. A commendable ambition, young man, said a small voice from across the cell. Milo looked up, very surprised, and noticed, for the first time in the half-light, a pleasant-looking old lady, quietly knitting and rocking. How do you do? She replied. You better be careful, Milo advised. I understand there's a witch somewhere in here. I am she, the old lady answered casually, and pulled her shawl a little closer around her shoulders. Milo jumped back in fright and quickly grabbed Tock to make sure his alarm didn't go off, for he knew how much witches hated loud noises. Don't be frightened. I'm not a witch. I'm a witch, said Milo, because he couldn't think of anything else to say. I'm faintly macabre, the not-so-wicked witch, she continued. I'm certainly not going to harm you. What's a witch? Asked Milo, releasing Tock and stepping closer. Well, said the old lady as a rat scurried across her foot, I'm the king's great aunt. For years and years, I was in charge of choosing which words were to be used for all occasions, and which ones to say, and which ones not to say, which ones to write, and which ones not to write. As you can imagine, with all the thousands to choose from, it was a very important and responsible job. I was given the title of official witch, which made me very happy and proud. At first, I should show you the picture. That's the witch. At first, I did my best to make sure that only the most proper and fitting words were used. Everything was said clearly and simply, and no words were wasted. I had sign posted all over the palace and the marketplace, which read, "Brevity is the soul of wit." But power corrupts, and I soon grew miserly and chose fewer and fewer words, trying to keep as many as possible for myself. I had new signs posted which said, "An ill-chosen word is the fool's messenger." Soon sales began to fall off at the market. The people were afraid of buying as many words as before, and hard times came to the kingdom. But still I grew more and more miserly. Soon there were so few words to be chosen that hardly anything could be said, and even casual conversation became difficult. Again, I had new signs posted which said, "Speak fitly or be silent wisely." And finally, I even had these replaced by ones which read simply, "Silence is golden." All talk stopped, no words were sold, the marketplace closed down, and the people grew poor and disconsolate. When the king saw what had happened, he became furious and had me cast into this dungeon, where you see me now, older and wiser woman. That was all many years ago, she continued, but they never appointed a new witch, and that explains why today people use as many words as they can and think themselves very wise for doing so. For always remember that while it is wrong to use too few, it is often far worse to use too many. When she had finished, she sighed deeply, patted Milo gently on the shoulder, and began knitting once again. Me wrongly as a witch and not a witch, but it matters not, she went on, for they're equally frightened of both. I don't think you're very frightening, said Milo, and Talk wagged his tail in agreement. Do you think she's very frightening? Thank you very much, said Faintly Macabre. You may call me Aunt Faintly. Here, I have a punctuation mark. And she held out a box of sugar-coated question marks, periods, commas, and exclamation points. That's all I get to eat now. Well, when I get out of here, I'm going to help you, Milo declared forcefully. That's very nice of you, she replied. But the only thing that can help me is the return of rhyme and reason. The return of what? Asked Milo. Rhyme and reason, she repeated. But that's another long story, and you may not want to hear it. We would like to very much, barked Talk. We really would, agreed Milo. And as the witch rocked slowly back and forth, she told them this story. We will save that for tomorrow. Have a lovely afternoon. I hope that if you are in the track of the storm that's coming my way, does not do you any ill. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.